go to it.
So we're continuing from where we left off, pretty much. And I think that we're at 12A4, the top of the page. And it's still the description of Achashverosh's opening celebration and party that the Megillah starts with. And we had a little detour where we talked not only about the physical elements of the setup, where was it, how lavish it was, and so on. But then we even had a suggestion here that it also included an announcement of a tax, abatement, a tax reduction, and that really made everything into a great party. That's the last thing we had, and now the Megillah continues. So who's reading for us today? That sounded like Bill, like you were volunteering.
No, it wasn't that, but you can construe it.
I could have sworn it was.
You can construe it that way. You can construe it that way.
All right.
If you like.
Thank you.
Middle of the left-hand column. The
No,
Megillah,
top of the left-hand column.
oh, top. All right. I thought we had already done that, but okay. The Megillah continues. The drinks were served.
Oh, yeah, you're
gold.
right. We did.
Okay.
Correct.
I think we're at the next Megillah continues.
I sit corrected.
Hey, I wasn't trying to correct you. It's fine.
No. Okay, good.
The
Megillah continues. The next
second Megillah continues. The Megillah continues. And royal wine in abundance. Rav said, if quantity is meant, the Megillah should have said, yain haraba, much wine.
Harbe.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't have the diacritical marks. Yain harbe, much wine. Since, however, it says Rav, the Megillah is teaching that each individual was served wine that was greater than him in years.
Okay. In other words, very aged, aged wine.
Aged wine.
Right, it's very aged. By the way, this is this guy's name, Rav, right? His name is Rav.
Yeah.
Right? He's called Rav.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. All right. Any profound comments on this aged wine?
Nothing profound, except that my understanding is that in the ancient world, the world that we're talking about here, and even up through the intertestamental period, wine was really pretty raw. It was very rough stuff, and that's why they're always talking about mixing it with water. My guess is that aging the wine would have smoothed out a lot of that roughness. So we're talking about really good stuff here.
All right. I take what you say, as authoritative.
And this is from a man who doesn't drink, so make of it what you will.
Right.
It's all based on reading.
Right. It's not clear whether he means also, did they actually key the vintage of the wine to the person's age? If you were 30, you got a 31-year-old wine. If you were 50, you got a 51-year-old wine. If you were, 120, you got 121. It's not, the language that Rav suggests is each individual was served wine that was greater than him in years. So not only is it that they were getting very high quality wine, but also it was a very individual attention that was being paid. How did they know that this kind of like, oh, look at how much they really paid attention to who I am. So that might be another aspect of what Rav is saying. Okay. The Megillah continues.
The Megillah continues. And the drinking was according to the law. What is the explanation of according to the law? Rabbi Hanan said in the name of Rabbi Meir, according to the law of the Torah. Just as the law of the Torah requires eating to exceed drinking quantitatively, so at the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, the eating exceeded the drinking.
Okay, so the Hebrew word is kadat, and that's a later Hebrew word. According to the law, we use this word when in the traditional marriage ceremony.
Yeah. Kadat Moshe v'Yisrael.
Kadat Moshe v'Yisrael, right? It's the law. In modern Hebrew, it's the word religion, which doesn't exist in traditional Hebrew. That's the Vashtia Kadat. The drinking was according to the law. There's in parentheses in the text that we have here, Ein Ones, that's the continuation of the verse, nobody being forced. So the simple meaning is that everybody, as they saw fit, could drink or not to drink. You want to drink more, you could drink more. You made your own rules. But here the Gemara is flipping it around and saying, no, it actually was in compliance with, a higher authority. The higher authority, though, is it a Torah law? Is there a law that you have to eat more than you drink?
Not as far as I know.
No, there isn't. Right? There's no such law. So the law here really is this kind of the traditional practice, the kind of ethos that has been adopted over time through the multiple ways that the Jewish way of life combines to create a culture, a civilization, an ethos, and that ethos is that we don't drink that much. We eat more than we drink, right? It's not the Jewish way. So this is actually not a legal idea. It's much more of a anthropological or cultural kind of idea. Let's look at note 56.
Note 56. Maharsha addresses the question of why Ahasuerus bothered to conduct his banquet according to Torah law.
Right. So in other words, here's the Gemara is assuming, oh yeah, that's what happened. He decided that we were going to dietary rules strictly observe. Right? What's Ahasuerus doing with this? What does he care?
He explains that Ahasuerus sought to avoid his predecessor Belshazzar's fatal mistake. Ahasuerus had erroneously concluded that Belshazzar's profanation of the sacred temple vessels was not in their use per se, but in the fact that he used them for drunkenness. Thus, Ahasuerus declared that his banquet would proceed in the spirit of Torah law, which stipulates that one's eating must exceed his drinking, and thereby hoped to ensure that the festivities conducted under his aegis would not degenerate into a situation which would arouse the divine wrath.
Okay, so much for his intent, right? Of course, he certainly did get and everybody got very drunk, but that's the suggestion that we have from the Maharsha. Yes, Jen.
Does it sound to anyone else like the sages really, really want to have been able to have been at this party? That's basically what it sounds like to me. Like when they're imagining this, they're also totally putting themselves there, in which case, of course, it has to be a kosher party.
Right, absolutely. And not just, I think, in that kind of limited way, but in general, this is what they're doing. They're taking everything and seeing it from their perspective. Mm-hmm. This thing that happened, in ancient times, hundreds and hundreds of years before their time, they see it as, they can only see it in their way, right? For some people, this is of course very annoying, but there's a tremendous mix of sophistication and naivete of a kind of a real cosmopolitanism and a real provincialism that alternates back and forth in the Gemara. And here's an interesting example of how at least the rabbi is saying, if we imagine ourselves, you are there, right? If you imagine yourself as being there, then certainly it would have to be so that we could actually feel comfortable. And feeling comfortable is the next point as well. Go ahead. 12A4. No, I think are you, Bill, we're waiting for you. Are you muted?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be a good guy, but I overdo it. Top of 12A4. The Megillah continues, without coercion. Rabbi Elazar said, The Megillah teaches that each one was given to drink from the wine of his own province, that is, wine he was accustomed to drinking.
Okay, in other words, try this wine, try this beer, try this. I don't want to. I like my drink. So nobody was being forced to try or made to drink something that wasn't something that was comfortable for them to drink. Okay.
The Megillah continues, to do according to every man's pleasure. Rava said, to do according to the will of Mordecai and Haman, who served as chamberlains of the cupbearers at the feast. For Mordecai is called man, Ish, as it is written, a Jewish man. And Haman is also called man, as it is said, a man, an adversary and an enemy.
Okay, anybody want to comment on this? Fill this in a little bit. So that means that the feast, the party, will fulfill the wishes of both Haman and Mordecai. That's how it's designed. What's the point here? I mean, this is a little more outrageous, right? The other ones are more, well, even, the fact that, okay, everybody could eat, everybody, we didn't feel alienated, we didn't feel out of place. Nobody was pushing us to be, to behave in a way that wasn't within our own comfort zone. I mean, those are, naive maybe, but you can imagine that these are concerns. Anybody that has to go to a party has those kinds of anxieties. Certainly I do. How much am I going to have to be doing things that I'm not comfortable with? So their comments up until this point seem to be very, generic. Now they're actually mentioning both of these people with the understanding, of course, that they're talking about a righteous person and they're talking about a very evil person. So what does it mean for them to push both of these guys into the scene? You're on mute again, I think. Bill.
I have no idea, but there is a relatively long note.
Yes, it is a long note, but I'm trying to see if we can
do it without that. Okay.
Create our own note.
Yeah, don't look to me. I'm completely unimaginative.
Okay. I'm looking at everybody else. Okay, so let's look at the note 60.
60. This is Rashi's interpretation. That is, that the cupbearers were to comply with the wishes of Mordecai and Haman. However, Maharsha argues that the cupbearers had been directed by Achashverosh to fulfill the specific requests of each individual guest.
That's what we had before, right? A little bit of your wine is your wine, your wine is your wine. So in that case, what is the role or what is the significance of mentioning Haman and Mordecai?
Maharsha therefore follows the interpretation of the Targum that Ish Va'ish refers to Mordecai and Haman as representatives of their respective nations, who would determine what food and drink should be served to their people. Thus, Mordecai was able to strike from the Jews' menu all forbidden foods, whereas Haman was able to provide the idolaters with every imaginable delicacy.
Okay, so here, the good and evil of Mordecai and Haman is secondary, but they simply represent Jews and non-Jews, or Jews and idol worshippers at this time in history. And what this is imagining then is sort of more in line with what we had before. That is, this is a meal that satisfies everybody and anybody, whatever their food limitations are, whatever their food restrictions are, whatever their food preferences are. Everybody could find something. There was the kosher smorgasbord table over there. There was the idolatrous smorgasbord table over there. And everybody then could be, could feel that they could attend in good conscience. So that's the Maharsha. Now we have Repinto.
Repinto offers another interpretation of the Gemara. Mordecai and Haman both desired that the feast proceed without coercion, but they were motivated by different concerns. Mordecai hoped that the Jews would not be forced to drink forbidden wine, while Haman hoped that the Jews would drink the forbidden wines of their own free will, for if they did so under duress, they would not be punished by God.
Okay, so a little irony there at the end, right? Haman is hoping that they will freely, willingly be trapped into idolatry, and therefore that they will be, punished by God for betraying God. So that's again a kind of a Jewish zigzag back into their own perspective. But I think that there might be some, insight or some possible wisdom in that suggestion also. When we have these kinds of pluralistic or diversity-friendly kinds of situations, it's possible to look at them in a number of ways. One way is that by recognizing diversity, each individual group is guaranteed its own dignity and its own empowerment to be itself. But over the historically speaking, other things have sometimes happened. The United States historically has struggled with this. What does it mean to welcome so many different groups in? What in the end is the expectation? Is the expectation that everybody just goes their separate way? Isn't there some kind of expectation that when we welcome, everybody e pluribus unum, that somehow we come together in some kind of unified way? So when we come into a unified way, where does that unification, affect? How and in what way does the unification affect the distinctiveness of each group? How much does unification demand some sacrifice of distinctiveness? To find common ground, is a noble and yes, we're all human, but in the end, we are not simply all human. We're humans in very specific ways. We found out ways to be human that are distinct from each other. So where does the commonality thrive, and where does it stop and the individuality begin? And I think that that's a little bit at the core of this insight, that you've got Mordechai saying, okay, this is great. Everybody's allowed to do what they want. That means that the Jews won't have to be forced to betray themselves, and each group, if we want to then extrapolate from that to every other group, also will not have to betray itself, right? Of course, there could also be the more narrow, selfish. I don't care about every other group. Let everybody else betray themselves. The Jews will not betray themselves. But if we want to be charitable, we can say, what's good for me is good for everybody. Everybody should be able to be authentically themselves. The Haman perspective is good. Let's throw everything together. And then the chances of keeping people down on the farm when they get exposed to all the other kinds of possibilities that are out there are very slim. And if that's my interest, that'll take care. If that's my interest, then bringing people face to face with each other can work to efface, the groups that are less powerful, that are less numerous, and so on. So these are tricky, problematic kinds of concerns. Anybody want to jump into this? No? Okay. All right. So we'll continue.
I've now unmuted myself. The Megillah continues. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal house of King Ahasuerus. The Megillah should have said that Vashti's banquet took place in the women's house, excuse me, which was a more private location, not frequented by men. Rava said both Ahasuerus and Vashti intended to commit immoral acts. Therefore, Vashti's feast was held in the king's house in close proximity to the men. And so goes the popular adage, he with large pumpkins and his wife with small pumpkins. That is, the evil man and his wife both engage in the same behavior.
Okay. So we've had this a little bit before, and now we're going to have an extensive discussion that posits that Vashti is not the heroine that she's often seen to be, certainly in our time, or a tragic heroine, but she is seen very, very, very poorly in this tradition. And she's as bad as Achashverosh. She just doesn't have the power that Achashverosh has. So, things, a bad thing will happen to her. But this section also, I just want to sort of, not a trigger warning, but just my own statement. This is it's not such a pretty text. It's actually a little ugly as we continue to go into it. We'll see how we feel about it or what our observations are about it. So this is, again, assumptions that the rabbis are making as they go into this text and imagine the situation behind the story. So they imagine that Vashti is not innocent. Vashti is just as bad as Achashverosh. And Vashti and Achashverosh both are the screens upon which the rabbis can project their own feelings and their own concepts of the goyim, right? So they are quintessential goyim. And what do we know about goyim? First of all, we know that they drink a lot, right? That's what we had earlier, right? They drink. The Jews don't drink. They eat. Yes, we always like good food, but we don't overdo the drinking. There's a Yiddish saying, "Shikar is a goy," right? That a goy is always a drunkard. And a drunkard is a goy. This was once upon a time actually also statistically the case, that drunkenness, what do you call it? Alcoholism was statistically less common in the Jewish community, and then that statistic eventually, exploded and disappeared. And it's just not true anymore. But once upon a time, there was this kind of again, an ethos-y kind of idea that Jews don't drink that much. And of course, there were always exceptions, but the ethos was that way. This year, I've said I've watched more television this year than I watched my entire life. And, I watched a couple of English detective series. They're drinking all the time.
Drinking and smoking.
It's like,
yeah,
it's like breathing. They're like, oh, drinking. Let me pour you one. I have to admit, I was totally culture shocked.
Yeah.
Did you watch Mad Men? Did you ever see Mad Men? Have you ever seen Mad Men?
No, I never saw Mad Men.
Oh, totally same thing. 50s advertising world.
Right. It's like this is
hair.
This is what it means to be a grown-up. You just drink. So it's it was weird to me. What can I tell you? I'm a prisoner of anachronistic Jewish ethos. But now we have other projections or other concepts that the rabbis have about goyim, and another one is that goyim have no sexual morals. Goyim are just totally reprobates when it comes to sexuality among themselves, and of course, then you always have the fear of the other in terms of their attacking your own community. But that's what they're assuming. They're assuming that Achashverosh and Vashti were actively pursuing promiscuous behavior. And that's why her party was in the same royal palace, Beit HaMalchut, the royal house. It wasn't meant to be a women's party and a men's party. It was meant to be sort of like a way to get everybody all revved up. And then who knows what would happen the rest of the time. And then we have this folk saying, right? This is the way people speak. People say this, so the rabbis knew the the way people spoke on the street, right? He's with pumpkins and she's with zucchini. Okay, so there are different interpretations of what that phrase might mean. And again, it's sort of it's a place for people to indulge their own imaginations of what sexual depravity might be. So it's like this, it's like this. Remember what's his name, Elmer Gantry, right? Elmer Gantry. So if I recall correctly, I haven't read the book in something 55 years, but and it was interesting as a yeshiva teenager to read this book. But he's like he gets up there and he gives these sermons about how terrible sin could be, and he really gets into it, right? He really gets into describing it because he's supposed to be righteous, but he's actually getting off on describing the sins. There's a little bit, unfortunately, of that kind of quality to this text. This text will and the commentators go into imagining what could this possibly mean in terms of the man and the woman. What are they doing? What are they trying to do? It goes through all kinds of things. What am I going to tell you? Yeah, Jen.
First of all, I feel like I should have had a much wilder life while I was still goyish. Like, I feel like I totally missed my opportunities here. Obviously,
I'm sorry that I don't have horns on my head.
The other thing is, yeah, it is really interesting because it does sound like they want to be at this party, and yet there's so they must be equally fascinated by did they just sit around wondering all day, wow, what do the goy do? What's it like to be goy? It's a weird contradiction there, right. Or not, maybe not a contradiction, but it's a weird fascination.
Right. Yeah. Well, weird is it's such a common and it's such a universal. So when does it stop being weird? I don't know. But yes. That other person, thank God, was created in order for me to project all my darkest, terrible, problems onto that other person. So, yeah. Okay. So this is going to continue.
The Megillah continues. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was merry with wine. The Gemara questions, was his heart not merry with wine until now, the seventh day of the feast? What then is the significance of stating that the king was drunk on the seventh day?
Okay, so let's, just as we said before, let's remember the irony here that supposedly, according to one view, they're eating more than they're drinking, so that they're drinking not on an empty stomach and so on and so forth. They're being very moderate. And yet, the story clearly is that we've gone into a really, the king has gotten into a drunken stupor. So, now the Gemara says, did it take him 7 days to get there? Go ahead.
The Gemara answers, Rava says, the seventh day was the Sabbath, on which the difference in behavior between Jews and idolaters is pronounced.
Of course, right?
Goes without saying. For when Jews eat and drink, they begin discussing words of Torah and words of praise to God. But idolaters who eat and drink begin discussing only indecent matters. Of course, they're Gentiles. And so it was the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, at the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, that they began discussing indecent matters. These would say that the median...
All right, one second, just for a second. I want to just editorialize a little bit.
Yep.
And, again, so I started it and we continuing it, sort of a little bit putting this into perspective and taking these words with a grain of salt. On the other hand, besides the projections that we make of how disgusting the goyim are, so that we can feel better about ourselves, there's also another part, and that is there's an aspirational part to this in terms of what we would like to hope about ourselves, how we would like to maybe, you could say we can kid ourselves that we're like this, or we can say this is the way we would like to be. And specifically to editorialize, the picture that they have of a Shabbos table is what I think of as a real aspirational image of a table where it's not simply, oh, the table is groaning with so much good food, and we have all the chit chat that people enjoy. That's all nice. That's all good, but that there's that discussion, that they're singing at the table, the words in words of praise to God, the Zmirot are specifically created to be that kind of vehicle, to make the Shabbos table a table of content, of substance, and of song. So, the picture may not be, or is not, fair or even accurate, but at least on one side of it, they're saying we could do this, and in many places they do. And here's the editorial part, and shame on us that we don't try harder. And I don't mean me, we Shomrei. The fact of the matter is that in the non-traditional community, the idea of having a Shabbos table with this kind of aspect of song and so on is a lost art. It doesn't exist. It's an alien concept. It's an alien practice in many places. Even people that really make it their business, it's beautiful. They make kiddush, they light the Friday night candles and so on. But the idea that you should actually then sing a song at the table is, you want to borrow Jen's term from before, super weird, really weird. But that has been, a Jewish practice for, 1,000 years, or maybe according to this Gemara, even longer. It's a shame when we lose something like that. Yeah, Bill.
What I always found the hardest, Rabbi, particularly in the years shortly after I converted, but it continues even now, is not so much to get used to the idea of singing. I learned all the tunes at the table of a fellow congregant, now dead unfortunately, who used to invite various people over every Shabbos. So this ideal was what we did. But what I found the hardest then, and even more after I no longer hung out with him, was to avoid kind of not gross discussions, but discussions of ordinary mundane things. I mean, there's an old thing, you're not supposed to talk about business on Shabbat, but I find that back in the days when we could still meet at, in the social hall after services, most of the conversation, not all, but most of the conversation, at least among the guys that I sat with, was about ordinary kind of things. Not, there were no dirty jokes or things like that might come up if we were at a cafe, but it was about going to the doctor, or about your wife's problems with whatever, or something that came up at work. And I don't know whether I just didn't fight it very, very much, or I just kind of went along with it, but I kind of missed the kind of picture that the rabbis are presenting here. I mean, you can get a little carried away, and it can get a little icky sentimental. I think to be at that high level. But I would have liked it a little bit more if I had been able to surmount the talking about mundane things, and I would have liked to have talked a little bit more about the kinds of things that they're talking about here. But it's very hard. Maybe because of the culture in which, maybe it's easier in Israel, I don't know, but for observant people in Israel, but it's very hard here, at least among those of us who aren't in an Orthodox environment.
I mean, I want to just mention, in the previous session in the Bite-Sized Wisdom, we talked about Leiv Tov, and this is not a head thing, this is a heart thing, and approaching all of this is also, you need to approach it with a heart, and that's what part of what's really important. All the conversation topics that you mentioned, they're very important topics. So I don't want to end up being some kind of Savarinola. Is that the way you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Those are human, important, things to talk about. So I don't want people to be inhuman, and I want to report the other side of it. I don't want to romanticize this in an overly simplistic way. I sit. Back in the old days, I would sit at my family's tables in Israel, mostly Zelda's family. Well, it is all Zelda's family that I'm thinking of. But I have friends also where the real danger for me at the Shabbos table was throwing up from listening to the Divrei Torah, from of listening to the way they thought they were talking about the Torah. So it ended up being quite disgusting sometimes to hear the kinds of things people said, not simply also because I just felt sometimes how much I disagreed, but also just also how puerile it was. It was just sometimes just like really stupid. So I sound like a real judgmental elitist, and I try to hide that usually. But
I go back and forth.
Yeah, but there's no guarantees. Everybody's got to be able to. That's why I call it aspiration. That's why I say it's something to think about and strive to make it work in a good-hearted way. Merle.
Addressing what Bill said, isn't part of the Kiddush after Shabbos a way for the people to get together and strengthen our community relations and things like that? And it's an opportunity. You don't see each other all week. Everybody's working. And now here you are celebrating Shabbat. And, to strengthen the community, I mean, not on purpose, but that brings people close, talking about children and wives and problems at work and, the latest doctor's appointment and things like that. It, on a more personal level, I think that brings people together. Where sometimes we're all separated, running around in our own lives. And on Saturday, you have a chance to kind of relax and share your life with somebody.
Yeah, bringing people together.
Talk about Star Trek.
We're against trivial discussions, not Star Trek. Only against the trivial stuff.
There we go.
So, bringing people together is important and valuable and beautiful in many, many ways, but not in all ways. Everybody is aware of the problems of what it means to live in a very close-knit community that has its downside to it, right? If everybody's brought together, in a kind of a back to the it can become coercive, right? It can become stifling. It can become super judgmental. Anybody that's not complying to my view of the ethos of the group is a threat to the group, or is judged to be not good. That's the flip side of close community connections. There's this whole trend out there now of fascination with people who run away from the Orthodox community, from the ultra-Orthodox community, right? These are people that have felt that they've been totally crushed in the community. The community is super strong and it bonds together, and I just extolled, they know how to sing at the Shabbos table and we don't. On the other hand, the downside is like the same kind of, Kleinstädtel, small village kind of mentality that people have when they go, into, so many other, not just Jewish, so many other contexts where to keep together becomes a militant stance. That the concept of of what's at stake in order to keep together, what cost are you willing to pay? So so it works. It cuts both ways. What kind of community togetherness do you want to create? What kind of community do you want to create that should be together? People get very, very inspired by feeling close to a community. But what if the community is a white supremacist community? What if the community is a terrible, is devoted to terrible ideas? The same, there's a word I think that one of the sociologists had, but I forgot, effervescence. He used it, it's a beautiful word. I don't know if Durkheim used it or Weber used it. there's a real feeling of liveliness that comes out of being part of a community. It's very, it gives you a sense of vitality. But then the question is, what's the community standing for? What's the community about?
Yeah. That's been studied a lot, Rabbi. I'm not familiar with that particular word in this context, but I know what you're saying. Among gangs, motorcycle gangs, but ordinary street gangs. That's part of the problem of getting people away from gangs. They joined them because they didn't have the feeling that you're talking about at home or with their own people.
Right, the gang fills that vacuum.
Yeah. But in a bad way.
Teams fill that vacuum. Teams fill that need. Not, I want to call it that. Our son, he loved, team sports because it really made him feel connected with other human beings, and in and of itself connected. That's what I don't want to get lost into some, this is good and that's bad. Connecting to another human being is good in and of itself. On the face of it, it's good. I'll share, there's a rabbinic teaching that I've shared before. How come the generation of the flood was wiped out by God, and the generation of the Tower of Babel was not? The generation of the flood, according to the way the Torah presents it, people were not nice to each other, and they get wiped out. All right. And then the generation of the Tower of Babel is understood to be an idolatrous generation. They wanted to go and attack God. They wanted to storm the gates of heaven. So isn't that worse? If you're going to destroy the flood people, so shouldn't you destroy the people that are attacking heaven? And the Midrash on this explains, no, but the people that were working on the Tower of Babel were working together. There's other midrashim that go the opposite way, but this particular teaching was saying they worked together. The generation of the flood, they were all at each other's throats. They were all killing each other and abusing each other and stealing from each other and hurting each other. The generation of the Tower of Babel, they were storming heaven, but they were storming heaven together. So that in and of itself is good. The fact that they have concern for another human being, that they want to be together with another, that in and of itself is a good, again, with a certain amount of perspective added. Okay, this was a big deal with the Hasidim, right? The Misnagdim, the opponents of Hasidus, look down at the Hasidim as frivolous. They're not serious. They're always looking for an excuse to have a shot of whatever alcoholic beverages were available. They're always looking for a l'chaim opportunity. They're always sitting around. They sing. They tell stories to each other. So it was considered very déclassé. It was considered they're really just doing it just in order to find another excuse to drink. And the Hasidim, at least some Hasidim would answer, how do you expect to feel any kind of closeness to God if you can't feel close to a human being? So the social bonding in the Hasidic community was considered a gateway. We talk about gateway drugs. It was a gateway experience to that willingness to open oneself to further connection. To be then connected, of course, ultimately to the creator of everything. So these are pushes and pulls. Okay, back to here. So the Gemara imagines again that in contradistinction to Jewish feasts, this was what was going on at the tables of the banquet. So what was the conversation? And so it was
at the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, that they began discussing indecent matters. These would say that the Median women are the most beautiful, while these would say that the Persian women are the most beautiful. So Achashverosh said to them, the vessel that I use, that is my wife Vashti, is neither Median nor Persian, but Chaldean, yet she is the most beautiful woman. Is it your wish to see her? They said to him, yes. provided that she will be naked.
Okay, so here we get into it, the down and dirty. Here's where we start getting into an ugly text. Because even though they're saying that Achashverosh is the one who's saying it and that the other Goyim are saying it, they're saying it, right? So there's a tremendous amount of misogyny here. And that's being produced here by these sages. All right.
The Gemara explains why Vashti was fated to appear naked, and especially so on the Sabbath. For with the measure that a man measures, they, that is the heavenly tribunal, measure out to him. That is, in the manner that one deals with others, God will deal with him. This teaches that the wicked Vashti used to bring Jewish girls and strip them naked and make them work on the Sabbath. Therefore, as her punishment from God, she was ordered by Achashverosh to appear naked on the Sabbath. This is really pretty bad. Thus it is written, after these things, when the wrath of King Achashverosh subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed upon her. As she had done to Jewish girls, so it was decreed upon her.
Okay, so you're saying this is getting really bad. What do you mean by that?
I mean, the picture of I guess of the intentionality of a non-Jewish woman seems perverse. It's almost as if they're, and I think I understand why they're doing this. They're obviously making a contrast between the captors of the Jews and the Jews, the way in which the people among whom we were forced to live are behaving and us. So I can understand that trying to make the distinction between the them and the us. But they just seem to me to be going above and beyond what might be necessary to come up with some necessary distinctions. And they're presenting these people, these non-Jewish people, as utterly perverse and debased. And that I don't see that justified by the text, by the Megillah.
So where might this be coming from? We've been talking until now, I've been talking, that these are projections, that these are our own dark, ids sort of getting, putting itself out and using the goyim as a way to, safety valve them. Any other sources for this then, besides our own fears and prejudices and resentments?
I think to be fair, there is a certain reality component to this. We do have historical evidence that among at least certain pagan societies, sexual debauchery was par for the course. So it's not utterly beyond the imagination that these pagans might engage in that. It just seems to me that they're going sort of beyond what's necessary to paint a bad picture of the Persian goyim.
So, yeah, Jen.
I mean, some of it could be reactions to persecution too. It's like actually really not good for your own soul to be persecuted. I don't know. I always thought that we actually did pretty well in Babylon. I don't know the extent of persecution we faced. I know that when a lot of people didn't go back to Israel, so it must have been okay. But but I'm sure there must have been some hostilities as well.
Yeah. So I want to concentrate on what you were just saying. It's not simply that the rabbis read or observed that goyim maybe engage every once in a while in ritualized orgiastic activity or something like that. That's not what this last text is about. This last text is about experiencing persecution. That's what Jen is talking about. It's about
I missed
accusing Vashti, and whether this is a historically valid accusation about Vashti and whether there's any kind of historical kernel of truth to it. This is what the sages are talking now about the obscene ways that Jewish captives were treated by whoever. So yes, they're using Vashti as the signifier for that, but it could have been the Greeks, it could have been Romans, it could have been anybody that becomes, of course, the generic goyim, and then somebody with power, and they are again basing how much should they get over it, how much should they stop exaggerating, how much are they legitimately reacting, is very, very hard to judge. But this is a historical, not a subconscious. How it affects the subconscious, of course, is very important. But this is not simply projection, is what I'm saying. This is not simply the fact that, you know what, we really fear the goyim, we really hate the goyim, we really think we're better than the goyim. This is part of the fuel that feeds some of this, which is we have suffered horrifically at the hands of certain goyim who have had power, and of course it goes down to our own memory. Very perverse kinds of persecution, not simply just shooting everybody down, not simply even just gassing everybody and burning everybody to death, but these kinds of ideas of nakedness and making a person become less than human in sexualized ways and in the religious ways, targeting the Jews specifically on their religious days to desecrate those days. That's what this text is accusing Vashti of doing. So whether it's legitimate, whether there even was a Vashti, I don't know. But this is what, so yes, the projection part is still operating, but here it's about naming these kinds of realities. I wanna hold on a second. Yeah. Well, one second.
Yep.
So I'm going to read to you, so I don't have to. All right, this is Psalm 137. It begins, Al Naharot Bavel, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat and also wept when we remembered Zion. Some people have the custom of reciting, we sing Shir Hamalot on Shabbat. This is, for some people, accustomed to recite this during the week. Yeah. It's a very different kind of psalm, right? The psalm on Shabbat is, oh, we're coming back. The returnees of Zion, we were like dreaming. We cry. Now we're going to be happy and laugh. This is the psalm that's different. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and also wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows within it, we hung our lyres. There our captors requested words of song from us, with our lyres playing joyous music. Sing for us from Zion's song. How can we sing the song of God upon the alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue adhere to my palate if I fail to recall you, if I fail to elevate Jerusalem above my foremost joy. So that's, some people remember this very well, right? Imish kachech Yerushalayim, if I forget you, etc. And now the psalm goes to the concluding section. Oh God, remember for the offspring of Edom the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they cried, destroy, destroy, to its very foundation. O violated daughter of Babylon, praiseworthy is the one who repays you in accordance with the manner that you treated us. Praiseworthy is the one who will clutch and dash your babies against the rocks. So that's an ancient psalm, well before this Talmudic discussion, but it's talking about the same kind of thing. It's talking about the hectoring, the taunting, oh, sing us a song, sing us, and this, of course, we know, unfortunately, happened during the Shoah as well. And this is from, 2,500 years or more before. This burning memory of how we were psychologically tormented and tortured, and how we watched our own babies just be grabbed and smashed to death. And this is not a noble, turn the other cheek text. This says, it would be great. How fortunate it would be for somebody to be able to see somebody do this to you, right? So this is unvarnished, heartbroken bitterness, hatred, rage, and impotent rage, and yet sanctified and remembered forever. So that's a little bit of what's going on here as well. Jen's point is very important. And we have the luxury to deal with that point, although other times and in other places we didn't have that luxury. For us, this is now one of the big challenges after the Shoah. And people are talking about this again and again and again. What do we do with it? What do we do with this feeling? What do we do with this memory? How do we frame it? How do we, if we're going to keep the memory, what's the point of keeping the memory? Is it to create a belligerent, heartless society that just sees everybody as being against us? What can we do that might be different? When we say never again what? What's the part that we don't want ever again to be? So these are very, very hard questions, and they should be struggled with. And too many people don't want to hear about it. They know the answer already. They process the piece of reality that they can process, and everything else falls by the wayside. So it's not at all obvious or easy for anybody. But here Vashti is playing that role of accepting upon her persona that horrific image of a human being so cruel and so heartless. And I think again there's a kind of a real excruciating quality that she's supposed to be also very beautiful. This is one of the great, questions that are involved, for instance, in thinking about the Shoah, the divorce of aesthetics from ethics. There were, so many people who were, monsters, who had a very refined aesthetic sense. This is as they would say, the people of Goethe and Beethoven, yeah. Did this. Where does beauty and goodness, come together? Shouldn't they come together? So that's also part of the horror of this scene. This is a scene of opulence, of gorgeousness, and Vashti is beautiful, and they're all monsters. All right. With your permission, I'm gonna have to end this right now. I need to deal with some things that just came up this morning. So I'm gonna end it here.
Toda Rabbi.
Yes, thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Right.